Hey, Jimmy, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me. Stoked to be here.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you again. You sent me an email talking about an interesting aspect of strength training that I don't think I've covered enough on the podcast. So, this is one of my favorite topics just because of how transformative it can be for runners. But we're not going to discuss the benefits of strength training or what specific exercises to do. I've already covered that extensively. But I really want to talk about the balancing act of managing lifting with your running. And Jimmy, I have to admit, I started lifting again regularly about a month ago, I'd say, and it took me a couple weeks just to get used to it. My body was surprisingly sore. Do you find that this is really common for people who start a more formal strength training program, even runners who might be running a lot?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's one of the main reasons to have some structure and consistency with it is so like you're not getting that soreness, especially if it's near race season. But yeah,
Yeah.
super common.
It would be like if you didn't run for 6 months and then you went out for like a 5 mile jog. That's probably going to leave you feeling a little sore.
Oh yeah, I've recently been coming off of an injury, so I know what that feels like. Taking some time off, and the quads are not used to the impacts of running as much as you cross train. It's a different sport, so it's not fun.
Yeah, and in our last conversation on episode 223, we were talking about just a better approach at treating running injuries. And a big part of that discussion was on load and how you can't just treat an injury by resting and not exposing the injured tissue to any kind of load. And this is very similar, right? Like if we're just not exposing ourselves to the load of lifting any kind of weight, even if it's our own body weight, it's really going to be a shock to our bodies. So balance really needs to be a critical aspect to this, as well as just doing it consistently. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually get this done. I really think this idea of balance and making sure that we are focusing mostly on our running, because after all, we are runners, but getting in the strength workouts that are going to allow us to really flourish as athletes. And it seems to me that balance is really about both the volume and intensity of the workout itself, so making sure that the strength training session is appropriate, but also in how you schedule that workout and how frequently you do those kinds of lifting workouts. Let's talk about each one of those aspects here, and maybe we can get your thoughts on, the ultimate schedule and structure for a very well-balanced program. So maybe we can just start with frequency. How frequent, when you're thinking about strength training for runners, should we be getting into the gym, lifting weights? And also maybe, are there other kinds of strength training sessions we should be doing in addition to lifting weights?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So first, I think the answer is it depends. Where are you in your season? So if it's the off season or the base building season early in your season, I think we can do more strength training. The volume of running is low. We have more time on our hands. We don't have to worry about recovery because we're not stressing our body as much. So off season, I think is a great time to focus on strength training and to kind of build your base of strength training, just like you build your base with running. So that's where I would start, and I'd say 2 to 3 days a week is really good. I tend to stick to 2 days a week year round. It just works with my schedule. But during that off season, 3 days a week is really good. And I think we'll cover this in a bit, but it's the timing of what you're doing is really, really important. So frequency is huge. Again, early in the season, we can get away with more, but when race season approaches, I'm cutting it to one short session, maybe none if it's race week and it's my A race. But so again, the answer is it depends. Where are you in your season? How much are you training? How much time do you have for strength training? And how much time can you devote to recovering from that hard session of strength training?
I like this approach of sort of pegging it to what kind of season you are in with your running. So if you're in base training, well, you're not racing, you're not doing really hard workouts, so you can afford to do a little bit more weightlifting. And I like how you have this like 2 to 3 workouts a week scheme, depending on what's going on with your running. How long should those workouts be? Because I know, I have some weightlifting friends who might get into the gym and their total workout might be close to 2 hours. And when I think about a 2-hour weightlifting session in the gym, My eyes start to bleed a little bit, Jimmy, because I'd rather be out running. So please tell me I don't have to be in the gym for that long.
No, I like to stick to like 60-minute sessions. If I'm going crazy and like I'm not running at all, maybe I can do a 90-minute session. But as we'll talk about here in a second, if it is off season and I'm doing a longer session, a good chunk of that, probably at least 50%, is going to be more of like a circuit style muscular endurance, almost like a zone 2 workout in the gym using gym equipment or bodyweight movements to get what kind of mimics a zone 2 or a easy day run.
Yeah, I love that too, because you don't necessarily need to be super specific with your weightlifting all the time. And just like during base training, when you can afford to do more strength training workouts, you can afford to do longer strength training workouts. You can also afford to do more intense strength training workouts where you might actually do the things that you wouldn't really do in season, like more cardiovascular or metabolic types of strength training, like circuits, like you mentioned. But a lot of these rules can be bent and broken in the base training season, or just a season where you're not really running very much, because you just have more flexibility in that. And I think that's a really good principle to keep in mind, which is the more difficult and specific your running is, then the more strategic and specific your weightlifting should probably be. Whereas if your running is a little bit more general, your base training, it gives you more flexibility to do a whole different variety of strength training workouts, because they're not really going to interfere with your running nearly as much. So I really like that. Now, when you are in season, do you cut those workouts a little bit?
I do, yeah. So actually, this brings up like a good point. I want to kind of clarify here, is that I think so. There's this big push in the endurance and running specific world of like where we are now embracing strength training as something we should be doing. Whereas like 5-10 years ago, you're like pulling teeth to try to get an athlete to lift weights, right? So there's been a shift in the culture and it's been accepted a lot more. But I feel like a lot of runners and endurance athletes kind of don't know what to do and how to structure it according to their season. So, and this is kind of what you're asking, but when I'm programming for a runner, I break their season into like 3 phases. So we start with kind of this like off season, early base season, like base building season. Then we're in our kind of hard training season, and then we're in our competition season. And so depending on where we are in the season with those three little blocks, it depends. The strength training can look a lot different. So in the off season or base building season, that's kind of where I'm at now, and a lot of the athletes I'm working with are now. We are focusing on like 60-minute sessions, 2 days a week, where something like 20 minutes of that 60-minute session is just doing some deadlifts, squats, and then maybe one core exercise. So a very small strength session, but it's 4 sets of 12, lighter weight, getting smooth with the movements, learning those movements again, trying to avoid what you described at the beginning of this talk about getting super, super sore. And then we go straight into a muscular endurance block where we're doing a circuit with body weight movements like step-ups, lunges, air squats, maybe an uphill treadmill in there, where we're just circuiting this like continuous 40-minute movement, building muscular endurance. And then as the season kind of progresses, we change that a lot.
I love it. I love this really strategic approach based on the kind of season that you're in. Can you maybe walk us through the next 2 phases of the season? You know, the competition phase, which comes sort of at the end as you're getting close to your goal race and you're tapering. And then there's that sort of hard training phase in the beginning.
Yeah, so the way I see it kind of transition is we have, again, this muscular endurance heavy focus early in the season. That's laying the foundation. It's like getting those movement patterns dialed in with lighter weight and higher volume. Then we kind of transition when you're starting to throw in your running workouts and the intensities building with your running. We want to pull back a little bit with the volume of the strength work, with the muscular endurance work, because we don't need to do that. We're doing that when we go run and we do a hard tempo, we're building muscular endurance. So in the middle, that second phase, we're backing off on that, and now we're focusing a little bit more on actual strength training. In this block, I kind of call it strength endurance, where now we are keeping the volume kind of low. I'm sorry, the volume is higher, the intensity is a little bit lower. So we're deadlifting, we're squatting, we're adding some single leg strength exercises in there, and we're pulling back. So that muscular endurance section that in the first phase made up 40 minutes of the class is now making up 15 minutes. Okay. With again, the focus is not making you tired for your workouts, for your running workouts, but building some strength and consistency in the gym. And then when we get into the competition phase of your training, we're really pulling back. We're not doing any muscular endurance work. We don't need to do that. We're just hitting the strength movements, the deadlifts, the squats, the single leg deadlifts, split squats, things like that, with higher weights and super low volume. So something like 3 sets of 3.
I think that's the kind of weightlifting that most runners are not as familiar with. And I liken it to a sprinter workout. You know, the kinds of workouts that sprinters do are just very alien to distance runners. You know, I remember being on the track team in college, and we would sort of poke fun at the sprinters because they'd be walking around most of the time. But what we didn't realize is that when they were running, it was so high intensity, and they wouldn't be able to sprint so close to their maximum speed if they weren't taking all of that very low activity level recovery of basically just walking or standing around. And the way that our weightlifting is structured at the tail end of a season is actually very similar to that. It's not high speed, it's high weight, but you still get a lot of recovery. You know, you're not doing a high volume of it. When we're doing those kinds of workouts, what are we actually working on? Because I think a lot of runners are very familiar with, you know, quote, hard breathing workouts, and we're building our cardiovascular fitness, our aerobic endurance. But what are we doing when we're just doing like 3 or 4 reps of a heavy squat? What physical skills are we gaining in this scenario?
Yeah, so we're in that scenario, we're gaining just raw strength. That's a true strengthening workout. And you're right. I find that the runners and endurance athletes tend to shine when we program those muscular endurance workouts, the long breathing routines. They love it. They do really well. And then you see we get to this phase, and it's harder. It's not as fun for them. We're picking up really heavy things and putting them down, and then there's resting. But the great thing, like if we structure the season in this way, you've kind of built up this big foundation with the early muscular endurance and then some strength endurance and then now true strength work, where you're going to do 3 sets of 3 and you're going to lift heavy weight. We're going to get a stimulus to the body to build strength. We're going to load the tendons really heavy, which our tendons love that heavy load. We're going to get a nice hormonal response that's building our body up. And then we're not going to get super sore if we do it right. So then you can still have like your hot session or your A session is the running workout, not this workout. So recovery is a bit better, and you got to keep in mind like running is a very like catabolic activity. It breaks our body down, and if we can have this strength training as a way to build our body back up, they complement each other very nicely. So that's the whole theme of kind of trying to structure your training in such a way where the strength workouts are not supplementing your running workouts, but they're complementing them. So we're almost like doing the opposite as we go through the season, if that makes sense. When you're running very low and your cardio is low running wise, we're trying to do that in the gym. And then when your cardio is very high and your aerobic work is really high in the competition phase, we're doing the opposite in the gym.
I love that perspective on things, that strength training is complementing your running by working on something different than what you're working on with your run training. So base training, you know, your running looks a certain way, your strength training is going to look a very different way. And then the opposite is true when you're getting ready to run that final goal race and your training might be, you know, starting to come down in volume, but it's pretty high intensity. And we really want to be working on the different skills in the weight room. When we're doing these kinds of workouts, we're not doing it for an hour, are we? Are these workouts a little bit shorter than an hour when we're doing 3 to 4 reps, heavy weight. What does the duration of these workouts look like?
Yeah, so that's the best part is they are typically like 30 minutes or a little bit less. Like get a good warm up in. Maybe you do one light set to kind of warm up, and then it's just working that three by three, 3x5, something like that. I pick 2 movements to do in a day. So maybe I do a deadlift and I pair it with a split squat or something like that. To hit those hard, pair them with a core exercise or a rehab exercise if you're working on an injury. And we're in and out. It's very easy. If you are dealing with an injury, this is a great time to just tack on that supplemental rehab style exercise. But I think one of my mentors in like the rehab and strength world is, I don't know if you've had Jay DeSherry on your podcast before.
Oh, he's a legend. I took one of his workshops last year, and he's great.
Yeah. So I saw him at a running physical therapy conference up in Park City. And I loved one of the things he had to say. He's like, he wants to see all of his athletes PR in the deadlift like the week before their competition.
I love it.
So it's like, just get them super strong right before a competition. Again, we talked about the benefits. You've talked about the benefits before. It's like lift heavy and get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I've said this a couple times in the past, but, you know, I am one of your kind of cliche body type runners. I'm just very thin, especially when I was, you know, really competing at my peak in my mid to late 20s. And for anyone who might have that kind of body type, you're just naturally thin, I just think it's so much more important to focus on strength training because, you know, as an ectomorph, like it's really hard for me to put on any weight, and the extra strength, looking back in hindsight, of course it's 2020, but that extra strength would have done wonders for me from an injury resilience perspective. And I really wish I had paid more attention to it in those years of my competitive career.
You hear Ryan Hall saying a similar thing. And obviously he's gone to the extreme where now he's solely focused basically on strength training. But I've heard him say a couple times where if he would have used the weight room appropriately during his running prime, that he would have been a lot healthier.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of runners right now who made that mistake and are now like desperately screaming into the void for other runners to not make that same mistake. Please don't make the same mistake. You are going to be healthier, you're going to feel better, and you're just going to perform better. You're going to be a faster runner, you're going to get fewer injuries. It's just a much more productive environment in which to train. There are a couple specific areas I want to get into with you, Jimmy, but you did mention how you like to pair a couple main exercises with some core exercises. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about specific exercises, but a little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. What are some of your favorite core exercises? Because I'm always looking to switch things up for myself, and, you know, I'm a little tired of doing planks. What else can we do?
Well, so first of all, it's like it drives me nuts, the word core, because I think in the running world especially it gets overused. And if we're honest, like the best core workouts are probably like back squats, front squats, deadlifts, where we're working the full body. Those are amazing. And so when I say core, I pair it with a core exercise, I'm typically like putting somebody in a half kneeling position and making them do an overhead press. So we're like putting their body in a weird position, making them use it where their core is having to stabilize in a kind of novel position. So half kneeling press I really like. I'm a fan of like dead bugs because we're working your hip flexors and your lower abdominals, hanging knee to chest. And then a lot of times when I say core, I'm also talking about the hips, and I'm sneaking in like some lateral toe taps, working the hips, some loaded carries. Probably my favorite core exercise is a loaded carry or a farmer's march with holding some heavy kettlebells. Those are a few of my go-tos. And I always think like, if you're strength training, the focus should be strength training. When I pair a strength exercise with something like the exercise I just described, we're just kind of filling time. I'm trying to slow the person down and make sure they're not just rushing through their sets. So it's a way for us to, one, sneak in some of this supplemental work, while we're forcing a little bit of rest for the main lift, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it almost seems like, the deadlifts, the squats, the split lunges, those are your strength training. And some of these body weight exercises or lower weight, quote unquote core exercises, this is a little bit more like conditioning, a little bit more general. Certainly gonna make you into a more athletic, robust, well-rounded runner, but not quite as specific as, lifting a heavy weight right off the ground. Let me talk a little bit about something that you said earlier. You said tendons love to have a heavy load. And I want to explore this a little bit because I feel like a lot of runners don't intuitively understand this. And it's only something that I've really gotten in the last couple years, that tendons are unique, aren't they? And we have to treat them well for them to stay healthy in the long term. Can you talk a little bit more about healthy tendons and how they require a heavy load and what that might look like?
For sure, yeah. So my background being physical therapist, doing some run coaching and strength coaching, in the sports medicine and rehab world, we have this saying, tendons love load. And when we look at the running population, the injuries runners get tend to be bone stress fractures or tendon injuries, tendinopathies. And we can use heavy load as a way to build up the capacity of these tendons to tolerate more load. So it's our intervention when you get a tendinopathy. We prescribe heavy, slow resistance. In the past, there was a big push for like eccentrics. You see like every runner that gets Achilles tendonitis starts doing eccentrics because you Google it and that's what they see. The literature now shows like there's probably a little bit of a better benefit if we just do heavy, slow resistance versus just doing the eccentric portion of the movement. We want to do both portions. Heavy, slow load is the way to go, and tendons love that. Depending on the tendon, the movement will change, obviously, but the way we tend to prescribe this is a 3-second concentric phase followed by a 3-second eccentric phase. So we're just trying to go really low, load the tendon slowly, and then slowly come out of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think a lot of runners, that's just weird for us to do. Even now, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to do that the next time I'm in the gym, and hopefully I do it the right way. Let's talk a little bit more about like scheduling. When do you like to schedule strength workouts? Because I feel like this is a big sticking point for runners and is a really key aspect to the whole balance equation.
Yeah, for sure. Can I back up a second though and go back to tendons?
Sure.
So, because you asked about like, what more about details about tendons. So tendons are like springs, and we want these stiff springs. And so that's one of the huge benefits of doing this heavy phase towards the end of your training block, is that we are building stiff tendons by doing heavy, slow load like that. If you had a spring on the desk here and you had like a loose, sloppy spring versus a nice stiff spring, when you push that stiff spring, it's storing that energy and it's releasing it. And so that's what running is all about, storing and releasing energy. We get free energy if we can have a nice stiff tendon. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Versus that sloppy tendon that's just kind of like not giving us much back. So that's one of the main reasons why we want to do this heavy, slow load.
Yeah, I always think of a kangaroo and how, if a kangaroo just didn't have those powerful tendons in its legs, we wouldn't be able to watch it just so gracefully hop like 20 feet at a stretch, because those tendons they would sort of collapse under the weight and force of what it was trying to do. And much like a pogo stick, we want to do something similar when we're running. We need it to be stiff, we need it to be firm, and we need it to really absorb, hold, and then release that free energy. We certainly can't do it if it's, loose. It's a weird way to describe a tendon, isn't it? Like, have you ever seen a loose tendon? Do they look different?
No, it's a great question. That you see it right when you watch somebody who has no spring in their step. Yeah, you can see it, but and you kind of alluded to here training like plyometric stuff too, because that is important as well. Where you start, like, you build the capacity of the tendon, get it nice and stiff, and then you start training it to be springy with the more plyometric type exercises.
Are there other ways of developing these stiff, well-functioning tendons? Is it heavy? Is it a combination of lifting heavy, doing some actual sprinting where you're actually utilizing the tendons in a very specific springy manner, and then also doing some plyometrics? Is it some, wonderful mixture of all three of those things?
For sure. Yeah. So running is great for it. Running is probably the primary way to do it because that's loading them, especially fast running. So that's where there's huge value in, adding your strides and being consistent with strides on a weekly basis, adding some short uphill strides to kind of really focus on that bounding and springiness. And then, of course, building the capacity via strength training, via plyometric training.
All right, let's move back to my question about balance and scheduling these strength workouts. Because I feel like a lot of runners have heard to put these weightlifting workouts on their hard running days. I tend to think that's a good idea, but it's also an advanced idea, and it's not going to work for every runner. I know for me personally, I have a really hard time doing any kind of quality work in the gym the day that I do a long run. I am just tired. I don't feel like I have the energy. And so I like to modify the schedule a little bit, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on, maybe ideal schedule for weightlifting, and then what are some other options?
For sure. Yeah. So ideal world, you get your speed work done in the morning, right? You get your hard run done in the morning, and then we give the body a break. We give it like 4 to 6 hours minimum, and then we're trying to come back with the strength training in the afternoon. That doesn't work for a lot of people, right? So a lot of people can lift in the morning and only run in the afternoon. And so we really got to work with the schedule. And this is where there's the ideal world, and there's what's realistic for you. So I think if you're doing strength training, that's give yourself a pat on the back. That's great. And if you can't get it in the perfect order, that's okay. The main goal, though, is we want to protect that hot session, the main workout for the week, and for a runner, that's your hard run days. So we really want to protect that where we're not fatiguing yourself before that workout. And then the strength training, I tell my runners, I don't care if you go into that session tired because you just did a hard workout. That's great. You're still going to get some benefit. The goal is not for you to max out on your deadlift or anything like that. We're just trying to get that stimulus on the body. So that's the ideal world. Doesn't always happen. And I don't think I've ever programmed a strength session on somebody's long run day. I just wouldn't do that.
So good. I shouldn't be doing that. Maybe there's something right that I'm just too fatigued. And with this 4 to 6 hour window in between a run and a weightlifting session, I think it's really critical to say that probably should include 2 meals in between, those 2 sessions. Some kind of meal right after your run, and then another meal pretty close to your weightlifting workout. That is going to be a big determinant of how you feel and how much energy you have going into that weightlifting session.
For sure. Yeah. And there's 2 points I want to bring up there. So one is, if you're a runner and you're considering adding strength into your routine, the answer isn't always yes, you do it, right? There's a lot of things you need to consider. So you brought up diet. If you're struggling to eat enough calories to maintain your running and stay healthy, the last thing you want to do is add more load onto the system and start stressing your body more when you can't keep up with the caloric demands of just running. So I think we got to be really tricky, where we kind of are cautious, where we're encouraging everyone to strength train. The other time I think it's not helpful is if you're a super busy person and now you're trying to cram one more thing into your day, and it's adding a ton of stress for you to get to the gym and try to do this, and then you're kind of half-assing it when you're there. That's just not worth it. You'd probably be better off sleeping more or hanging out with your family and relaxing on the couch. You know what I mean? So there's lots of little things to consider. Yeah. So, but to your point, if we're gonna strength train in the morning, hard run in the morning, strength train in the afternoon, we definitely want to be refueling in between there. I think one of the main reasons we see runners getting injured is it's just hard to eat as many calories as we need. So if anything, you want to kind of overdo the caloric intake on these days where you're making really, really hard.
Yeah, and when it comes to strength training and then running, I know this was an option that you mentioned. Is that something that you typically recommend, or should runners try to do their run before the weightlifting session?
That's what I recommend mostly, yes. Again, I definitely have people who strength train in the morning and then do their hard workout in the afternoon. I personally can't do that, and I think it's like I'm a morning runner, so I just don't like to run in the afternoon. I always feel terrible. If I were to work out and then or lift weights and then run, I'm gonna feel extra terrible. So that's my bias, right? We all have our biases. That's mine. I don't like doing that.
Yeah, it seems to me that we should prioritize our sport specific exercise. And as runners, that's running. And if we're going into a run feeling fatigued from a lifting session earlier in the day, especially if that run just, it isn't an easy run, it isn't a base run or a recovery run where it doesn't really matter exactly what our pace is, it's more of an effort sort of run. If we're running a workout where maybe we're running our goal 5K pace and it's really important that we hit our splits, especially if we have a really clear time goal that's coming up, I want to prioritize that workout. I don't want to go into that workout, essentially prioritizing the weightlifting session first. I'd much rather nail the running workout and then have a mediocre weightlifting session. And it seems like you're okay with that too. Like you're okay if someone goes into the weight room and they're tired and they're not really going to be able to lift the same amount if they were 100% fresh. What's the thinking behind almost, I don't want to say mailing in your strength training workouts, but being okay, not really prioritizing them and going into them not feeling optimal?
Yeah, I think it's just understanding we can't be good at everything. We can't like pull all these levers and expect to be amazing at all of them. So we have to prioritize. It's always, if we're a runner, it's always going to be prioritizing running, unless you're in like beach body mode and you got something you're trying to, I don't know, you have some more physique goals or something like that. But for most of us runners, it's like the thing we care about is running and performing. And so we got to prioritize something. There's benefit. You're still going to get some benefits from the strength training. And most of us don't have, in fact, I don't know of any runner that I work with that has like a PR, a deadlift PR goal or something like that. So we're not prioritizing it.
Does that also mean that we probably shouldn't schedule a weightlifting workout, especially if it's a more challenging weightlifting workout, the day before a faster training session or a long run? Because then we might just be sore and go into that more important running session with extra fatigue.
Correct. Yeah. So if anything, if a runner can't do the order, the sequencing that we want, I try to say like, could you do your speed workout in the evening and then come back the next morning and do your lifting? Like the opposite of what you just mentioned, right? So then again, we're always trying to think, how can I protect that workout, that running workout? Because that's the goal, that's the focus, that's what we really want to see our body adapting to and change it, responding from.
I fielded some interesting questions from some more competitive runners who actually feel a lot better the day after a weightlifting workout, and they may actually do one of those shorter, more power and strength oriented weightlifting workouts like we were talking about with 3 to 5 reps. You're only working on a couple exercises. It's relatively short. They feel very tuned up and springier than usual after a session like that. Is there a point where these workouts can be used to aid a faster training session like that?
I've never thought about that. That's a good question. I could see that working, especially if it's somebody who has a big background in strength training and they have a history with it, so they're not getting as sore. And it's almost like you're kind of the way you're describing it is like it's like priming their system to be like firing on all cylinders the next day.
Right.
I could see that happening. Yeah.
In my mind, it would be very similar to the day before a race. You do some drills, you do some strides, and you do some plyometrics. All of those things are going to increase muscle tension and leave you feeling a little bit springier than other things that you could do in training. And so that's actually a really good pre-race day priming session. Very short run. You're not going to fatigue yourself, where you can do some strides and drills and just a couple short plyos. And you're just going to be ready to like jump and hop around and run fast. So for a middle distance runner, that actually is a really great way to prime the body. And I can see you doing something very similar with weightlifting. You just have to make sure it's not too much.
For sure, yeah.
So as we're thinking about balancing our weightlifting workouts with running, we've talked about 2 to 3 workouts a week, depending on where we are in the season, more workouts earlier in the season. Are we doing any other types of strength training during the week besides those 2 to 3 more dedicated days? And this is admittedly a pointed question, because I like to have runners do, short, more PT oriented body weight exercises for maybe 10 or 15 minutes after a run. It's more of a cool down. It's not super challenging, but I just think it's really helpful to go through some movements. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that and what you like to prescribe your runners.
So I tend to prescribe 2 hard strength sessions a week and then 1 kind of rehab style session a week. As far as the rehab, like these supplemental rehab exercises, they're always tailored to the individual. So looking back at your history, what's been like the weak link? What has been the thing that has like sidelined you the most? What's your injury history? And we try to use that day as like honing in and building up that area. So for me, it's been my calves. That's been like my weak link. I tend to strain them often. And so once a week, I have my like calf routine that I go through on that like PT supplemental day. Could I do it more often? Sure. I just don't have time. I'm busy, got 2 kids, got my work, and so if it was an ideal world, I'd probably do it 3 days a week. But I will often then also try to take some of those exercises that you're describing, and it's like tack them on to the end of the strength session, where I'm already in the gym, I'm already doing the thing, and then it becomes like essentially the cool down to the strength session.
Is there a benefit to doing that, to adding more of the more therapeutic body weight exercises to the end of a weightlifting workout, or is it more beneficial to spread it out over the week? Do you have specific thoughts on that?
I don't. That's a good question, though. So when I prescribe exercises to patients, I typically recommend 3 times a week, kind of depending on where they are, but 3 times a week is common. So I do like to spread it out so that we are dosing it throughout the week. But it's important to remember that like we're putting a lot of load on the body already. So like I want to find that sweet spot where we're keeping it pretty simple. We're not overdoing it. We're saying, what's the minimum amount of this stuff that I can get away with doing and still get the benefit? And so I think if we're doing heavy load in the gym, we're working everything. You're working your full body if we're doing like some of these routines we described. So your supplemental PT stuff, you're already working on those exercises when you're doing your heavy strength, right? You're already working on those areas when you do those strength. So for me, we are doing them multiple times a week, even if it's kind of in disguise with the heavy lifting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You're doing it, loaded in a more general way when you're lifting weights, and then you can get a little bit more specific when you're doing more PT-oriented work.
Correct, yeah. And I think there's benefits to both of those. And the question is, and I don't think we really know the answer to this, is like, how specific do we need to be with some of these things? So if you have knee pain, do you need to do like isolated knee extension or something like this? Or can we just load it with a heavy squat or split squat and get the same benefit? I think the answer is probably we'll get the same benefit.
I'd love to go down a tangent and talk about your calf routine. Because I think for a lot of runners, especially, I've been reading a lot and just anecdotally, it seems like once guys reach master's level runners, they just start having calf problems, Achilles problems, soleus problems. If someone has a history of that, what are some of the high impact things they could do to keep their calves healthy and happy? And maybe like, what do you specifically do?
Yeah, that's a great point. So you're 100% on point. Like as we get older, especially males, the lower leg is like the problem area. That tends to be what we see runners getting is these Achilles tendinopathies, calf strains. And so I think it's good to be preemptive with that stuff and start a program. So for me, the way I sneak stuff like that in is either on that supplemental day or it's tacked on to the end of my strength training day. It's going to be a heavy single leg heel raise, barbell on my back, my foot balanced, like 1 foot balanced up on a bench, 1 foot on flat ground, and I'm doing a heel raise with that foot on the flat ground, if that makes sense. We can share a link to like a video of me doing that, but trying to load it really, really heavy. So 8 to 10 is hard to do, but we're going well beyond body weight because when we look at like the demands of running on the lower leg, I think it's like 7 times body weight is going through the calf and Achilles. We can call it the calf muscle complex to simplify things.
We
But
wonder why body weight calf raises are not enough.
yeah, we need to load it heavy. So barbell on your back, doing some single leg heel raises. I start there, then I'll do like a split squat position, doing a heel raise with the front foot, holding some dumbbells. So again, we're loading it up. And then I always like to add one more plyometric-y exercise. So that could be, well, all of my programs typically warm up with either jumping rope or hopping in place. So we're getting like a bouncing exercise in there. But if we're talking specific to like the rehab for this would be a single leg bouncing activity. So I do these like single leg pogos. If you can imagine that same position, 1 foot on the bench, the back foot on the flat ground, and then I'm bouncing on that back foot. Trying to teach that tendon to be springy, teaching my leg to be stiff and springy. So those are kind of like the 3 I like.
I love that. And I think especially just the idea that you've got to load these tendons and using relatively heavy weight to do so is a good idea, even though it can strike a lot of people, myself included, as a little risky, just you like lifting a heavy barbell with just your calf. I'm like, oh, don't hurt yourself, Jimmy. But that's what we need. That is what we need.
And
So
of
as
course,
we're
we're gonna make sure you gradually build up to that heavy load. We're not just saying go put 135 pounds on the bar and have at it today. Build up to it, be smart and be reasonable. But yeah, the goal is to get to that heavy weight.
Yes, I think that goes without saying for any advice here on the podcast. It's let's do so progressively, gradually, safely, strategically, intelligently. You shouldn't just go couch to 100-mile or couch to heavy back squat. Let's get there in a safe way. So as we're thinking more about just balancing our running with strength training, especially weightlifting in the gym, are there any big mistakes that you see runners make on a regular basis that might impede their progress or make this balancing act a little bit more challenging?
So the first thing I'd say is like, if you're strength training, that's great. Like, I don't want to beat you up if you're doing it wrong. Like, nice work, like for getting out and trying to do stuff. But I think the big mistakes I see people doing are just doing the same routine over and over and over again throughout the entire season. So that's why I wanted to talk here today, was just to like encourage people to like think about programming their strength, like I said, to complement their running. So we have those phases. That's hands down the biggest thing I see is like they pick a routine and they just stick to it and they're doing it literally like year round. Maybe they'll switch up 1 or 2 things, but the sets and reps are always the same. So that would be number 1. Number 2 is just this like boom bust idea where like you get gung ho for like a week and you do go hard and then you're super sore and then you're like, I can't do this, and you stop for a month and then you try again.
Jimmy,
and you're going to you're going to get no benefit from that. The whole goal is we're trying to get your body to adapt and cause tissue to change. And if we're doing this boom bust thing, we're just like constantly getting sore for no reason.
Yeah, I think it's also really helpful to know that, as runners, we measure our fitness levels by and large by our aerobic fitness level. And that can really start to change in a couple weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks. We start feeling in better shape. But when we're talking about developing stiff springs with our tendons, really anything with our connective tissues, the changes to those tissues take a lot longer, and we should be a little bit more gradual with how we are lifting our weights and engaging in plyometrics and doing any of this kind of hopping or really heavy load work, just because it doesn't take a couple weeks, it takes a couple months. And having a longer term perspective on that progression is going to be really helpful and save us a lot of, pain later on if we're getting injured.
For sure. And I just made a post about this, more about tendinopathies, but the saying is that tendons take time, right? So it takes a long time for tendons to adapt and change. And so consistency is key. And especially if you have an injury, if you have a tendinopathy, you're looking at like a 6 to 12 month time frame where you're going to feel symptoms. And it takes that long for the tendon to adapt. Even when we're doing everything right with PT and loading it, it takes that tendon a while to adapt.
Yeah. Is that because the tendons simply don't get as much blood flow as, say, your muscle? There's just not as much, of a vascular network in the area?
Yeah, for sure. That's a big part of it. And then like collagen turnover is just slower. I've been coming back from like a posterior tib tendonitis, which is even slower because that tendon is inside of a sheath that kind of protects it. So the blood flows lower. And that one took 2 years.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's a while.
Yeah, it was not fun, but finally getting back after it and haven't had symptoms. So I'm pretty happy.
All right. Well, I think this has been really helpful from like a 30,000 foot level of thinking about your strength training as an evolving practice over the course of a season. It shouldn't stay the same. You can be less specific in the early parts of your base training season, and simply how heavy load is really important. Are there any other major aspects of the way we should be thinking about our strength training, the way that we balance it with running, scheduling it with, our other hard running workouts to not just not get in the way of those workouts, but actually enhance and complement those workouts? Is there anything that we didn't cover?
I think we covered it, but I would say this is my perspective, and there are other perspectives, and this is the way that I like to do things. It makes sense to me logically. I've heard other people kind of flip the entire thing, where they do the heavy strength early in the season and then the more like rehab stuff later in the season. I don't like doing that. It just didn't seem to work for me. It doesn't work with the way my brain works. I want to build this foundation first and then get to the heavy stuff later in the season. But I think if you as the runner should try things, try different things. Don't get stuck in your routine and do the same sets and reps over and over again. Try something different. Try structuring your training throughout the training cycle with some sort of phased structure and see how it goes. Like experiment. This is what training is. We try something, we see how our body adapts and responds. Did we get the result we want? Yes or no? And then we try again. And it can be this like fun collaborative thing if you have a coach, but it's always trial and error and see how you as an individual respond.
Much like our running, right? Like we would never run 3 miles 3 times a week and then never evolve the training at all. Just like that,
Yeah.
when we go in the gym, we want it to change. We want it to do different things and have different focuses at different times. And those changing focuses and this evolution of focusing on different things at different times, that is what the adaptation process loves. And it's what ultimately helps us become the runners that I think we want to be.
For sure. If we run 3 miles every day, the body stops responding. We're giving it no reason to adapt, so it stops.
Yeah. We've got to engage in this consistent exercise of progressive overload in a lot of different ways. Jimmy, thank you for your expertise, for coming back on the podcast for a second time. If folks want to hear us talk a lot more about preventing and treating injuries, we can go back to episode 223. But Jimmy, where's your home base on the internet for folks who want to check in with you?
So I am at Redefined Physio on Instagram, and that's where I only am. I only have Instagram, so that's a spot. If you are interested in more about this strength training stuff, I do have a a link in the bio where you can see a sample program that kind of goes through a 12-week program, what this looks like. Or send me a message. Happy to chat with people. I love talking about this stuff.
All right, I'll include a link to your Instagram profile right in the description of this podcast so folks can go check it out. Jimmy, thanks again for being here.
Of course, appreciate it. Thank you.